Hello again. Once again, I'm still Steve Flanders, and you're not. That's probably a good thing. Uh, this is episode number 15 of 15 Minutes to Save America. This time I'm going to be talking about the constitutional limits to local community moral self government. I already talked quite a bit about all the different things you'll be able to do and how all these local communities will still have to respond to the demands of stark, raving reality. But the Constitution is going to offer an awful lot of limits that will keep things from becoming too extreme and keep us from becoming enslaved to various religious cults. Okay, first point to make is a lot of so-called scholars, down through the years have tried to make the case that the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, should apply en masse to the federal government or en masse not apply to the federal government. It's ridiculous. Each amendment contains within itself how it is to be applied, and most of them do apply to all the states, but each one contains its own limits. So I'm going to run through them. The First Amendment we've already talked about. It is a limit on Congress. It is not a limit on the states or localities. Second Amendment, there isn't any government mentioned. It says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Certainly, by mentioning no government, it means all governments. Okay? And that's one of the ones that's going to come up when we talk about local community moral self-government. The third doesn't make much difference, and nobody's quartering troops these days. The fourth has to do with search and seizure, and will have a lot to do with life in local community moral self-government. The fifth has to do with property, double jeopardy, due process. We'll get back to that one also. Speedy trial is in the sixth, trial by jury is in the seventh, and cruel and unusual punishment, no excessive bails or fines, is in the eighth. The rights not mentioned are reserved to the people in the ninth, which means if it's not mentioned, it doesn't mean it is controlled by the government. If it's not mentioned, it means it's not controlled by the government. The 10th is a limit on the federal government, which has a lot to do with the local community moral self-government. The 11th is the limit on federal courts. The 12th, mode of electing. 13th is no slavery. 14th is also going to be very important to local community moral self-government. Get back to it. And it goes through the rest of them. It's pretty obvious which apply, which don't. 18-year voting and women voting both will have to do with local community moral self-government, because locals and states can't take the vote away from people over 18 or from females. Now, the way this will work, really the 14th Amendment is the first one to focus on. The 14th Amendment, for all its abuses and misuse, has a tremendous value in calling for equal rights and equal protections of the law. This will have a huge effect on local community moral self-government. No matter what the community is, the more extreme people in an area they'll have their opinions tempered in what they're going to do if they know that the law has to apply to them equally. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. The law, whatever the law is locally, the federal government will have the power to make sure that whatever the law is gets enforced equally, and everyone is equally protected by the laws. That's going to be a huge modifying effect on local community moral self-government. Another one that's going to be just as important is the Fourth Amendment, prohibiting unreasonable search and seizure and requiring a warrant to be signed. We get into having various cultures and various moral agendas established in various localities. People might end up living in a place that they don't really agree with all the laws. Say you're living in some place that has prohibited alcohol, okay, but you like to drink, or some other place has prohibited pornography, but you like to look at it, right? Well, under the Fourth Amendment, no warrant can come down except by a signed by a witness. So if you keep that drinking to yourself, and maybe out of town friends or whatever, and in the privacy of your own home, there's no warrant that's going to issue. Same with porn, same with drug use, same with an awful lot of the sexually diverse lifestyles. As long as you're not out there trying to proselytize and convert your neighbors, it's real unlikely anybody's going to see or know or really care. Okay? It's when you try to affect the moral atmosphere and the moral environment within which people are trying to live and raise their children and have decided they don't want those things around themselves or around their children. When you start trying to change that by breaking their laws, yeah, you might run afoul of that. But if you're sitting in your own home, that's where the English idea of your home is your castle. That unless you're trying to affect the larger local community, they have no reason to come after you. And the only reason they would is if you're trying to convert other people to your way of thinking and they report you. Okay, so that's how the Fourth Amendment can work. The 14th will be somewhat similar. Now, with all of this, the things that come to mind are really religious extremists having control. And one of the things coming up these days is the whole idea of Sharia law. And this will apply to other religions besides Islam. The idea of Sharia law in force couldn't exist under this Constitution. First of all, under Sharia, slavery is legal. Okay, it's not going to be legal here. I don't care how many people you have in your state. We fought a whole civil war over it. There were a whole bunch of states that wanted slavery. They no longer have slavery because we passed the 13th Amendment, which forbids slavery. Okay? In addition to not allowing slaves, where Sharia will call for honor killings. Well, this violates the Constitution in two places, in my opinion. First of all, it violates the idea of due process, which is preserved in the Fifth Amendment. But it also violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishments. Just because some guy said he thought he saw his sister sneaking into somebody's house, that's not due process. If in a modified Sharia, if they wanted to, the family could disown that girl. They might even have a thing where they can deport her from the state. But capital punishment for adultery is just not on the agenda anymore. Yes, I understand in the Old Testament and in Islam it calls for it. But that's considered cruel and unusual today. Now, maybe our morals and standards would change over time, but today it's just a violation. So, likewise, cutting off people's hands for theft. You're not going to go around in America maiming people, some 10-year-old boy because he stole a candy bar. Now, we can have punishment for crime, and I think we should have more. And I think on the local level, we can have other things. We can be putting people in jail more or enforcing the law more vigorously. But the idea of cutting people's hands off and honor killings and beheading people, the idea that you can kill people because they leave your religion, that's not going to hold up. If people want to leave Islam, if they want to become a Catholic, you're going to have to just put up with it. Just like if somebody converts from Catholicism to Islam, it's just the way it goes. Compete for them. Try to win their hearts and minds. You don't get to kill people because they no longer want to belong in your religion. Similar kind of prohibitions would probably come into force when it comes to Hinduism and the caste system. By custom, I suppose you could have some sort of discrimination, but I'm not sure the federal laws against discrimination really stand up to constitutional scrutiny. But the idea of equal rights and equal protection under the law does. Okay, so you're not going to have public schools and forbid the Dalits to attend them. You're not going to have elections and forbid Dalits from voting. Okay, and so there's going to be a modification of Islam and modification of Hinduism, and within that, I'm not particularly concerned about having various religions in this country, because the other side of it is that Christians would be able to set up their towns the way they want. And we could once again have laws against pornography. We could once again have laws, you know, teaching the Bible in school, starting the school day off with prayer, using education to inculcate Christian morals in the children instead of using secular humanist values. All of those things and it can come into play, and every community within every state, the states can have various ways of dealing with it. There may not be as much local variation in some states and have it much more a state-run kind of thing. Other states would probably have it more locally. Either way, people would still be able to find a place that were doing things the way they wanted to within the limits of the Constitution. And when we do that, that competition will come down to which state, which culture grows the best kind of culture that people really want to live in. So that's pretty much it on local community moral self-government. I've got two more 15-minute segments. The first one I'm going to hit on a little bit today, which has to do with race, and especially the African-American Black experience in this country, and how much it relates to local community moral self-government. And it's going to be number 16 and going, and so I'm going to start into it a little bit now, which is African Americans endured a uniquely cruel slavery, but even the beginning of it was unique. And that has to do with where we are with local community moral self-government. I will go into this more in depth the next one. But it was what's called the Middle Passage, and people came over on a ship and were basically, everything in their life was taken from them. Their clothes, their food, their way of dealing, even their language. Unlike the slavery in Brazil and stuff, where people were pretty much left to talk however they wanted and, just work to death. In the United States, they were brought over enslaved in such large numbers that it became a demographic challenge, so that the people that were enslaving them were very rigorous in stifling any cultural expression and especially language. So after coming over with the tremendously traumatic, individually devastating experience of the Middle Passage, Black people, when they came into social cognizance, were speaking English and were in the bottom of the social ladder. That bled into, we went from slavery to Jim Crow to affirmative action, but along the way, Black Americans and an awful lot of other minorities never experienced local community moral self-government. And I think that, more than anything else, is the cause of the ongoing trauma within the African American community. I know I'm stepping out where white folks shouldn't talk, but I want to say this, and I'm going to get to the next one, go into it much more in depth. For now, thank you. Be sure and share this and talk about it and all.
Another short segment this time. Just remember to go to the post, How and Why to Save America, if you want to read ahead. This has been the last one on LCMSG 8, and next time we're going to be going into race. Done with number 15. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for caring. And please do share these videos. Thank you.